I woke up this morning with some consternation thoughts. An image appeared, and in it, a question was asked. What is needed, required for survival? Three things: food, shelter, and companionship. There are factors afoot, particularly here in the United States, whereby some of the largest construction projects outside of the military are artificial intelligence facilities and facilities to detain folks that are in some fashion painted with a very broad and somewhat unclear brush as to their being different than what it is that our current regime has determined they don't want. In these two enormous construction projects, I'm leaving the military out because the military is actually even bigger than those two as far as its resources being utilized. Excuse me. Pardon. Where does food fit into your considerations? Is it, or has it been devolved to economics? Now, there are issues put in place by the current regime that continue to increase the economic disparity between what it is that we need to survive food-wise and how much of our time is required to be put into place in order to attain the economics in order to put that food on our table. And my sensing is that less and less of the companionship, it's ironic, that word companion. I lean into the aspect of Libra, compan, with pan bread. It's the breaking of bread with others. That is companionship. And in that sharing quality of time spent with one another, opportunity arises for conversation. Now, how much increase in our time allotment is required to make money for survival purposes, to potentially a tipping point where that Libra balance is really out of balance in one way or another, as to the effective time that we get to spend with one another being truncated. Less time to compare notes. This is part of the regime's directive. Don't trust anyone else, or don't spend time or trust someone who looks different than you. And yet, the irony of this is that every one of us as humans and other beings on the surface of this planet are, each and every one of us, all of us, made up of the same elements. What has the earth given us at this time willingly as a gift in this opportunity of the current incarnation to discover that we mean to one another, that we mean to the earth itself and to all the living creatures that are in the environment. As I glanced at the astrology for the upcoming week, there were really only two aspects that stood out to me. One is Venus and Jupiter. They're going to conjoin this week on Tuesday. Tuesday's a Mars day. That's the 9th. On this very same day, let's just go to that day, Mercury is going to be in an exact square to Saturn. So we have Cancer, a sign representing the water element. First of the water element in the natural unfoldment of the astrological cycle. Cancer represents home, family, the hearth, our roots, our connection to the ancestral realms. There's a finesse in this first of the water signs that invites us into more of a sensitivity to feeling what is transpiring, not just between one another, but at all levels. From that deep rooted place within which it's likely the soul dwells, to the highest, intentional or not, mental configurations of what it means to actually be in tune with another. Can you feel into that? Well, here on Tuesday, in the sign of Cancer, this Venus-Jupiter conjunction, these are the two most benefic of planets. I'd say, well, what does benefic mean? It means it's beneficial. Each one of them, in their own way, their own very particular way, seeks to inspire, breathe in aspects of cooperation, companionship, potentially, in that mix. And Venus, the ruler of Libra, how do we engage with one another? And from the Taurian side of Venus, are we tuned into a survival level of value and worth that is always in play at so many different levels? And it's coming into contact with Jupiter, which is exalted while in Cancer, which means that it's got a very strong tailwind of energy to, in true Jupiterian fashion, ask us, what else is there? What more is possible? Now, you might say from a certain perspective, that sounds pretty beneficial. Let's couch that slightly differently. Perhaps the extra piece of cake that Venus is presenting to you, and piece of cake is more of a metaphor for something that you really desire. But from the Jupiterian perspective, do you know where to draw the line? How much is enough? Because in true Jupiterian fashion, too much is also on the table. So that extra piece of cake, that extra, adventurous experience that you want to go on that is going to, cost you in one way or another more than you should afford, that's still Jupiter at work. This Tuesday, this Mars Day, Mars wants, impulse and drive and action and things in Taurus. So there is a connection between that Mars in Taurus and Venus up there in Cancer that's at work on this day. That energy of, that driving impulse to have that extra piece of cake. I've always said, when in conversation with any Taurian or just the Taurian archetype, do you want to make a Taurus happy? Provide them with extra dessert. Oh, I can almost feel the grin on a Taurian face saying, well, yeah. But you have to know your limits. And this brings me back to the experience of the regime's cultural paradigm right now is pushing very, very hard at sustainable limits for our survival here in the U.S. and different places on the globe. I think of, we're getting near ironically, the celebration of 250 years since this country was officially initiated. And so there are efforts underway to celebrate that. What aspects of our American culture, North American culture, do you sense are in that worthy of celebration category? I would be reticent to include our propensity to involve ourselves in war. The economic ramifications, as well as the soul-wrenching incursions on the life process that war represents, is not something to celebrate. I get the image of children playing in a sandbox as being part of the political game that is being played by only a few characters in positions of authority on the planet now, trying to, grab as much of that sand in the sandbox and bring it to themselves. For what? That saying that the one who dies with the most wins. How about the one who dies? And how much has been, of that sand pile that's been gathered around you loses its relevance rather quickly once you're dead. So why is there support for a warring culture? Why are we building so much capacity for artificial intelligence, AI, when what we actually could use more of is actual intelligence, something the soul carries. Those computers, they don't easily tune into the soul level of what it is that life is about. Information, yes, information. They grab all the information from everywhere and put it together for you in ways that are artificial, not necessarily actual. And why on earth is our country building an infrastructure of prisons that surpasses 100-fold over anywhere else on the planet, to throw people into, remove them from the collective. I don't know that you could give me a reason for why it is that we are doing this and why it is that we are allowing this to be done. It is wrong on so many levels. A lot of the caged, and I use that term rather deliberately, people that have been thrown into these gulags have been paying taxes for years and years and years, and they have been removed from the tax structure because someone says they're not like us. Well, wouldn't it be ironic to discover that those incarcerated folks are actually paying more into the tax structure of this economy than a small handful of extremely rich folks that are not paying anything into the support of the economics of our country. They're just like, that hungry sand collector in the sandbox. Give me more sand. I don't care if anybody else doesn't have any. I want all the sand myself. And what am I going to do with it? Oh, well, I haven't really thought about that. I just want more. I think that's a term called greed. Yeah, greed. It isn't supportive of a continuation process that doesn't have a very hard terminal point, which throughout history has been represented by revolution. You've just tipped that Libra scale to such a point that the populace no longer will support what it is that this few in their positions of prestige, authority, whatever term you want to use for it, smoke and mirrors, and is no longer able to sit by idly and allow the shift of resources to move from the earth, the general populace, into the hands of a small cadre of this current regime's focus. Now, we won't be able to see here in the Northwest this Venus-Jupiter connection, which is it's an early morning thing. You got to get up before the sunrise to see it. And I think, let me think on that. No, sunset. It's an evening thing. As a matter of fact, I think I have seen Venus off in the west after the sun goes down. But because our weather before Tuesday is very, very wet. It's beginning Monday night, going into Wednesday morning. We won't actually be able to see it. It's a spectacular thing if you happen to live somewhere where you have clear skies in the evening time, to be able to notice these two, brilliant things. Venus is definitely brighter than Jupiter, even though Jupiter is much bigger. Venus is a lot closer. Anyway, Mercury, how we think, is also in the sign of Cancer. Think along the lines of, what is it that my sensing capacity is tuning into, and I want to, or I'm inclined to, say something about it. This is Mercury, or at least think something about it. And right now, on the same day, it's going to be in a square aspect to Saturn over there in Aries. Saturn's function is to create a sustainable and potentially substantial structural format within which things can transpire. That's a basic Saturn archetype. It says, I want to make things meaningful. You just have to ask yourselves, meaningful to who? Meaningful on what level? Is it meaningful to just a few people? Is it meaningful to this planet that we live on? Are my thoughts and communication capabilities, because this is a square between fire and water, that fire Saturn up there in Aries, and that water Mercury down there in Cancer, there's tension in the air in that. It doesn't necessarily mean something's going to be easy that's going to come through. However, squares are not all bad. They're there for a reason, to create a functional reality that is about building something. Here we're talking about the Aries impulse to, strike out, be open and creative enough in the moment that it isn't really clear or known what needs to be birthed. This is Aries, I want to be. What do I want to be? I don't know. I just want to be. And Saturn says, well, we need to put some sort of a format or a structure around that beingness. But it's still in Aries. That beingness is still an unknown. Mercury down there in Cancer says, does the beingness that you are tuning into have roots, substantial roots in a structural context that can support growth going forward, that is substantial, that is going somewhere, that is providing what is required for as many as possible. This is that inner. This is all happening in this Mars Tuesday this week. I'm going to just zip ahead a couple of days. We get to the 13th. Venus just changed hats. no longer in the sign of Cancer, just stepped across that line into Leo. Leo is essentially a creative element. There's, percolations of creativity seeking audience. That's Leo. This is Venus, that essential capacity we have to engage with one another in the Leo format. There's an experimental nature in that. Why is it that we've been brought together? And what is it that we came together to create? One of the things that Leo, or the fifth house, represents is children. Another is theaters for expression. Another is taking chances, gambling. Follow the path that best suits your particular trajectory, as Venus has just moved into the Leonian dance, ruled by the sun, which is in Gemini. There is a curiosity factor in play here that best it is to pay attention to. Also, on this day, the moon, having just entered Gemini, goes out of bounds. When planets are out of bounds, they don't have a tendency to, easily or maybe effectively want to play in the same sandbox in the same way as those others that are in the sandbox might want to initiate. No, when a planet's out of bounds, it's like, I've got, percolating thoughts that are, pushing me in directions that I hadn't anticipated before. I need to follow that. Moon, how you feel, ruler of Cancer, is not necessarily going to be inclined to stick to a trajectory that others have said, this is the way you need to go. I don't think so. Not when a planet is out of bounds. And the moon being out of bounds it's speaking a different language. It's in Gemini. It's holding hands with Uranus. Amplifying what? Unpredictability. Unpredictably, why? Uranus says, well, if things stayed the same all the time, life would get kind of uninteresting and boring. And from the Uranus perspective, in Gemini, the curiosity element is kicked up. The potential for, you guessed it, revolution. Revolution, something going around a process. That is a revolution, which, involves, if you're paying attention, things need to change in order for that revolutionary process to continue to unfold and make things new. Uranus is here to awaken us to aspects of our presence that we might have fallen asleep somewhere along the way and weren't paying attention to enough, that the Uranian factor arrives and says, hey, shake, rattle, and roll. You need to wake up to what's going on in a fashion that is different than what it is that you thought was going on. The moon tickling Uranus on this Saturday, this weekend, before it moves ahead to the 14th. On the 14th, late in the day, will be the next new moon. We end the week on a new moon. At this, basically at 24 degrees of Gemini. Are you ready? This week's, it's going to bring some things to point. Very specifically, the opportunity for growth and expansion as we engage with one another. That Jupiter-Venus conjunction opens up potentials that haven't been opened for us in a while. The Mercury-Saturn thing says, I'm at some level not necessarily the most comfortable I have been in this process of understanding what home means to me, Cancer. The Gemini signature of this new moon has to take into account that mercurial factor, asking us, is the idea of home and hearth, of family and buried resources, our root connection to source, is it in place enough that as I set out on this next lunar cycle, that's what a new moon is about, is the curiosity factor, Gemini, going to, hold me back from the invention, Uranus, of something potentially new unfolding? Or am I going to be willing to change, wake up to something that has not transpired yet? That was one of the factors that I woke up to this morning, thinking of that food and shelter and companionship. And is there enough of that available? And what am I doing as a vehicle that speaks to be that kind of an invitation to wake others up, myself included, into the potential for something so new, so dynamic, that the release, the letting go of those things that I've potentially held sacred way too long have lost their value and do not represent the potential for change, the potential to turn something in a revolutionary fashion over to spirit. That's the bottom line. That's the invitation that this week asks us to contemplate. Darn, I probably talked long enough. So we have some things to do, to work together on as we do the water dance, like the two water droplets behind me. We have things that we came as gifts built into the soul essence of who we each are. Are you allowing a release of that gift that you brought in this incarnation into your circle? It's one of the main purposes for being here now. And we each are required to provide the space, the atmosphere, if you will, to others to locate that often hidden gift our soul has brought with enough patience to let the magic of that gift presence become larger. It adds into the picture of what life is about. Are you holding an old picture behind you that you can't escape from because the new picture hasn't formed yet? That's not wrong. I think that the potential for a brand new picture is, it's knocking rather deliberately at the door of our conscience, saying, something is out of balance here. What needs to transpire currently is something that has not happened before, because we haven't been allowing that new magical current the freedom required for that birthing process. Thank you. That's all I got for this week. We have things to do together.